Hi, everyone. I'm Devin Maguire, Product Marketing Manager at Cycode, and welcome to our next session, Secure Through Control, Visibility, Governance, and Guardrails for Agentic Development. The agentic development lifecycle looks different from the SDLC of old. The inputs are different. It's no longer a developer typing code. It's humans prompting AI agents, and those prompts can expose secrets or intellectual property. The actors are different. Developers and non-developers alike are trusting agents to generate code that is shaped by MCP servers, AI rules, and AI skills that can be manipulated and malicious. And the outputs are different. It's not just more code or that the code is generated by agents, but applications themselves are changing as we develop for agentic experiences and AI users. The composition and logic of AI applications come with their own set of vulnerabilities and risks. So if we kind of put this all together, a non-developer can leak a secret in a prompt to an unapproved coding agent that's connected to a malicious MCP server, which generates code that's vulnerable to prompt injections. These are all kind of challenges that barely existed 2 years ago, and established security tools weren't designed to address them. So what do you do? That's what this session is all about. I'm joined by Michael Roberts, cybersecurity leader at Abbott, Derek Fisher, the founder of Securely Built, and Katie Norton, senior research manager covering DevSecOps and the software supply chain at IDC. Michael, Derek, Katie, great to have you with us. Let's get into it. And I want to start with a kind of a quick opening question, because there's this gamut of potential risks associated with agentic development. But in 30 seconds, when you hear that phrase agentic development, what's the top security concern that comes to mind? And Katie, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks, and happy to be here. And thanks for having me. I think when I think about agentic development and security, the first thing my mind goes to is that the coding agent isn't just a tool, right? That it's a credentialed actor with access to your repositories, your APIs, your secrets. And I think that the real concern, the security issue there is that enterprises are extending trust deliberately because of the productivity gains that they're getting from these tools are really real. But an attacker who can influence that agent's behavior, they inherit everything that trust grants. So you're basically organizations are essentially creating a privileged insider operating over an attack surface. I think that most teams aren't really monitoring well enough.
Great. So this kind of trusted actor in the development lifecycle.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, what's your take on, you think about agentic development? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I agree that the identity of agents is a big deal. It's something that we need additional solutions and need to solve for. I think something else that is a pretty big deal is the supply chain risk of dependencies downloaded and just the actions that these tools can take on a user's behalf, right? So for those developer use cases, these tools can download new dependencies that the user may have never heard of and test them and test a feature, find out something doesn't work, and go and download three more dependencies from who knows where, and that's hard to keep up with at the speed that these tools can operate at. So I think managing the dependencies and the tools downloaded, all of the underlying actions that an agent takes at machine speed is going to be a difficult security problem that needs to be addressed.
Great. And Derek, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'll take a little different tack with it. I think some of my concerns around the automation bias and some of the lost skills. Right. I used to be a software engineer in a previous life. These coding agents have rekindled a lot of that previous knowledge and has have been able to produce some projects and build some apps and things like that. But there is an automation bias in the sense that I I feel like I'm pretty comfortable and have a lot of control over what my coding agent is doing on my behalf. But it generates a lot of code, and you're not going line by line, looking over every single line of code. You're sort of accepting that there's going to be code generated by the agent that you're just not going to review. And so, I think that's one of the concerns that I have, looking into the future. And again, the other sort of part of that is what skills are we losing as engineers, as developers, as technologists that we're handing over to these agents to do for us. What happens when it doesn't work? There's lots of memes out there about, Claude's down, everyone's staring at the sky because they have no idea what to do. That's a real concern, I think, for the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's kind of some skills we're surrendering or losing, but also we're allowing these agents to do things. So there is kind of this sense of losing control when we have agents that are entering the development lifecycle and doing things for us. Curious, where do you see that loss of control really happening in practice? Is it that we don't have visibility into what these agents do? Do we not have policies? Is it enforcement of those policies? Something else entirely? Katie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd almost actually kind of riffing off of Derek a little bit, push back on framing it like entirely as a technical problem. I think in practice, the breakdown happens before really any controls even possible. That agentic coding tools, from what I've seen in the organizations that I work with, are often being adopted by engineering teams, even at a team or an individual level, without security even in the room or the discussion. And so by the time a security team learns that developers are running, say an autonomous agent with access to production repositories or, or any of these highly sensitive things that they're touching, these tools are already embedded into the daily workflows of a developer. So I'd say like a pattern, we've seen this before, right, with cloud adoption, with open source, with shadow IT, these things where when there's this speed and privilege level involved with agentic coding tools, it's really different, because this is different than like a developer and a rogue SaaS subscription, right? So I think when I think about losing control, sometimes it starts even before the tool is even doing any coding.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it does, it used to be we would just secure the outputs of what developers wrote, but now the risk really does enter when tools are selected, when prompts are made, and it really there seems to be that foundational need of visibility into what developers are connecting, what they're using. So before you can establish policies and governance and enforce those, you kind of have to know what's in use, what coding assistants are being used, what skills are being connected. Michael, I'm curious, at Abbott's scale, you have global teams, complex pipelines, regulated environment. What does visibility into AI tooling look like for you? What are some of the challenges around that, I guess?
Yeah, I think the first thought there, and going off right, the previous points around the importance of knowing what is going on and governance, is that cybersecurity teams need to be a partner to the folks trying to use these tools. We can't come in with just a compliance mindset, just a strict governance hat on, and try to stop the shadow IT or the AI usage. That isn't going to get us very far, and we're not going to like truly be partners and enablers to the people trying to use these tools, and it's going to cause more friction and more of that shadow IT and hiding what's going on. So I think at the large enterprise scale, global scale, organizations need to treat this as an opportunity and have security folks that are partnering with the individuals enabling these use cases and latest developments in technology, and work with them to address their needs, to ensure that they have the tools to securely work on what they're trying to work on, and build up that inventory, basic cyber hygiene along the way as they're partnering with these business folks.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's always that friction. But yeah, Derek.
I was just going to add on that. I think there's, when we think about the different AI availability, the things that we have available to us in terms of AI, it's hard to really quantify and understand, because I don't want to say it's impossible, but I think we need to think much more broad than like our coding agents and going to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, or Copilot. But, it's being integrated into, the ones that we see and can touch and feel in terms of those, the Claude, the ChatGPT, and so forth. But it's also being integrated into the SaaS providers, whether we want it or not, or the tools that we already have in our organization, whether it's an ERP or CRM. The AI platforms and technologies being integrated into those as well. So when we talk about getting a grip around where AI is being used and how it's touching our organization, we have to think very broad, because it's literally, whether we want it or not, or whether we're asking for it or not, it's being integrated everywhere.
Yeah, so kind of pervasive, tough to get visibility into the first place and see kind of the cascading effects of AI and where it's in place. But I guess there's that initial challenge of visibility, but then there's also, you have visibility, how do you implement controls and governance over that and actually implement policies? So Katie, you talk with a lot of different practitioners, a lot of different vendors. What do you think, how mature is the market's approach to this kind of AI governance within the development lifecycle?
Yeah, from IDC's research, I think the concern about agentic AI security that's universal, right? One data point I have is that in a survey we ran, 92% of organizations express at least some concern with the security risks from the agentic AI in their development workflows. But the concern and preparedness for that concern, I don't think are the same things. So when I look at the controls organizations actually have deployed, I find the picture is primarily behavioral. Again, in another survey I ran asking around what controls they have put in place, we saw things like training developers on things like secure prompt engineering, or mandatory peer security review of AI created code, right? And I think those are really reasonable starting points, but I think, reflect an rotation on developer behavior rather than like systemic level oversight that's actually needed at the speed and scale that most organizations are moving towards. So I think to actually have that policy-driven governance, it requires something a little more structural. And in some of the research I've done, I kind of proposed a 3-layer framework, right? Is how do you secure AI generated code at the point of generation? How do you validate, trace, track, and have those sort of large checks on maybe what gets through? And then how do you also have that governance and oversight into, which agents, which models, which MCPs, all of those things kind of have to play together to be able to do this securely. And right now, most organizations at best have partial coverage, maybe at layer 2, I think. And a lot of that, what gets through, I think very few have those like point of generation controls or that governance and oversight in any real meaningful form.
So you have behavioral programs in place, but missing that. I really like that three-layer modeling for the controls. Michael, curious from a more practitioner perspective, how do you think about governance of AI within Abbott's ADLC, SDLC?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also say it needs to be a mix of that, like people, process, technology, right? And the way we typically talk about transformations and and governance. So there's the people aspect with the training and development, providing the proper resources to them, and there's an infinite amount of process and technology options out there. I mentioned fitting in with teams, helping enable them, work alongside them as a security partner, figure out the process that they need and where you can fit in security into that process when it comes to secrets management and dependencies and logging and human review, whatever the security controls are, right, that could be fit within that process that aren't overly burdensome and aren't delaying the process or delaying the release or enablement of that team. And then there's obviously a growing number of technology solutions in security for AI, whether that's to protect the secrets and identities, dependencies that I mentioned before, or just to perform that like supervision of what the agents are doing. So I think it comes back to those three key areas: people, process, technology.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Derek?
and if I could just add, I mean, I think I spent the bulk, if not the majority of my time in cybersecurity and in application security, so software security, product security. And at the end of the day, like the code that's being produced by these agents is still code, still applications, it still should be treated the same way that we would treat a code that was being developed by an entry level engineer or senior level engineer. It needs to go through the rigorous process that we have applied elsewhere, with some nuance related to the way the code is being generated, the way the secrets are being managed within the coding agent itself. So I don't think that there's a huge fundamental shift in terms of what we do in terms of protecting what is actually developed by the agents. The other thing I would say is about we talk about human in the loop when it comes to ensuring that the agent isn't given excessive, no pun intended, but excessive agency to be able to perform actions that perhaps are high risk without a human being able to click a button and say accept. The challenge with that obviously is scale. We've heard about Mythos and the potential for future models being able to slice through security organizations at a rapid pace and create all these vulnerabilities. The same is true if we create an agent that is solely there to do nothing but patch our software, find defects, bugs, vulnerabilities, patch them, and produce pull requests into our branch. So if we have that human in the loop, those humans can suddenly become overwhelmed with having to process multiple requests for review or merge requests or whatever the case is, however it's set up. That's also a bit of a bottleneck that we have to be able to contend with and make sure that we're getting a good signal to noise when it comes to those types of generations.
Yeah, it's I got asked recently, like, are we trading the alerts for reviews, violation alerts for now we have to human in the loop reviews of AI recommendations or actions.
But the violations don't go away. That's the thing. Like, we're still
absolutely
there too. So you're just doubling up.
Exactly. So I actually want to go back. So you mentioned, the output is still code, and I think that's absolutely valid, and we have to scan that code, and the fundamental practices are still valid. But something, Katie, you brought this up, is that the risk is entering before code is generated. It's entering in those prompts. It's entering in agent permissions, tool invocations, what you're connecting. So are the guardrails and controls different for agentic development? Like, do we have to add these layers? Yeah. Katie, I'll direct that to you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yes and no. I agree with Derek a lot in that I frequently talk about how the primitives of application security aren't changing. Like, you still need to scan for CWEs, you need to look for CVEs, that you probably test in the runtime, test in the code, all of those things. I think what's really changing and what I see, especially in the tooling, but also the adoption patterns, is like where and how these things are being implemented. It's a shift of like, and who you're interacting with, right? So it's interacting more with the agent and influencing its actions rather than trying to make a developer be more secure, right? Especially as developers move from AI assistance to like full, even multi-agent autonomous coding, you have to interface with the agent, right? So a lot of the policies, what we're telling it to do, the authorization issues, the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, those are the same. That's not changing. It's like when and how we're influencing things that's going to change. But at the same point, there's going to be 0 days. There's going to be code that AI doesn't touch. You've got legacy. I talk with plenty of organizations that have mainframes and mainframe apps, and so it's definitely a defense in depth kind of situation. It's just we have to be thoughtful about where security is getting integrated into now. As we shift from like the SDLC to the ADLC, and implement those good best security practices in the ways that will still allow benefits or still allow organizations to achieve the benefits and speed that they're getting from adopting all of these AI tools and practices.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the classic security debate is like developers and organizations adopt these things for a reason. They make things faster and better. There's always that, security versus velocity, and how do we enable this without slowing it down? And Michael, you brought this up kind of multiple times of people, process, technologies, and how you balance the enablement for the organization with managing those security risks. So, how do you think about calibrating that balance?
Calibrating the balance of security risk with like development and progress.
Yeah, and specifically, I guess the adoption of agentic development.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the positive here is that there's also agentic tools and capabilities that can help us with this security. So while the AppSec primitives stay the same and still need to be done, just because AI produced the code quickly doesn't mean it doesn't require the same level of control. Luckily, we have AI solutions that can help there. So performing code reviews or architecture improvements and security checks and balances, and can review current infrastructure, can continuously make improvements. There's all kinds of modern AI solutions that help speed up the security of this new quick generation of code and infrastructure and solutions. So I think that's what I think of as how to balance needing to progress quickly and to have sufficient levels of security. Is you have to embrace the agent reviewing itself sometimes, or a separate security focused agent reviewing the work of a development focused agent. So you have to lean into using agentic AI to help with that security versus relying on slower primitives.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, I feel like AI is this, maybe unlike some previous advances in development, but it is an opportunity for security to participate in it as well, which I think is a positive and cause for optimism. We are. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think, one of the things that we sometimes, I don't want to say we lose sight of in security, but we get sort of, wrapped around like very specifics and things like that. But, cybersecurity is about managing risk and managing the risk of the organization being able to produce value at the speed that they want to produce it, and being able to balance that against, what are the risks that we're trying to mitigate here? And at some point, like, with agentic, code creation and leaving these AI systems to create code, look at the code, deploy, and make sure the environment's correct, and we're handing all of that off to the AI, systems to do that. That's a real risk question. Are we willing to accept the fact that we have AI testing AI? Is that something that we're willing to allow to happen in the name of pushing out some type of a product, and getting it out to market much faster? That's an organizational question about risk. Otherwise, it is going to require human in the loop, manual reviews, the same type of systems that we put in place for product security for the past several decades. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's always risk framing is always a good place to come home to. We are unfortunately approaching the end of our time, but I do want to ask kind of a final question and kind of takeaway for the audience. If you could each share maybe what's one pitfall you've seen that you would advise people to avoid, and one kind of top priority as audiences think about how their organizations are adopting agentic development and they're enabling the secure adoption of that development. So, Katie, I'll start with you.
Sure. I'd say on the pitfall side, don't write an AI policy before you know what's actually running in your environment. I think like policies without any inventory or visibility is like, that's just a document and not necessarily able to do anything or map to anything that you can enforce. So I think like visibility is a really great place to start. And the thing to me to prioritize would be, I think you should really be thinking about measuring like outcomes, not necessarily like counting controls. I think having a policy, it's not the same thing as like understanding your posture, right? If you can't instrument your environment well enough to know whether your guardrails are actually working and you're achieving the outcomes you want to achieve, you'll end up having this like false sense of security, right? So and I think that's what we're exactly warning against. So yeah, so know what you got and make sure that you think about what are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve with all this that you're doing.
Great. Michael?
Yeah. Similarly on pitfalls, right, I would say don't try to boil the ocean with the AI governance approach instead of just talking to the teams that are using AI, talking to the people involved and figure out what's going on, how you can fit in, how you can help them, what they're trying to do, those kind of things. So again, focus on that over building your strict AI governance policy. And then I think the top priority is to focus on the security capabilities within the tools that teams are already using, and to again work with them within their processes and preferred technology to figure out how they can be configured as securely as possible, how they can have guardrails there, and the correct security features enabled versus giving them a separate tool that they've never used before, a separate pane of glass to look at, something like that. Try to fit in to the team workflow as much as possible.
Great. And Derek?
Yeah, I think, just to add to Katie and Michael here, that obviously we want to make sure that we understand, what we have before we start layering in like an AI policy. But additionally, I think sort of going back an additional step there is to ask, like, do we need this? Like, do we need to incorporate AI into this particular system? Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean we need to do it. I sort of go back to like the IoT, craze where I remember seeing there was connected flip-flops. Like you could buy flip-flops that had Bluetooth and enablement. And it's like, what are we doing here, right? So I mean, that type of question needs to be raised as well. So I think that's sort of a pitfall is, do we actually need to do this? In terms of, future and how to prepare for this or how to be better positioned for it, I sort of go back to three kind of like main steps. It's one, visibility. Do you have detection and observability into the systems that are leveraging, AI? Do you have that policy and that context layer? The context layer is really like, what does the AI have the ability to touch and control? And then start enabling those guardrails around, what you've discovered in those previous two steps. So that's sort of my takeaway there.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. The IoT flip flops is a good reference and framing to think about. Just because we can, should be, but also kind of really great framing for thinking about this conversation generally. So, thank you, Katie, Michael, Derek, for joining us and sharing your perspectives. Really appreciate you being here. And with that, I will pass this back to Monica to take us to our next session.